The Word for Stay. The Word for Stay. By Brian Bullock, a Starborne Studios production. Cole Renner had spent 11 years hauling cargo across Harren's world, long enough to read its dust the way other men read weather. The dust never stopped falling here. It came down fine and gray and slow and buried everything in the end. He read it now from the cab of the crawler, one scarred hand loose on the yoke, the other shading his eyes against the haze. The dunes ran gray to the horizon in long, slow waves, and the wind lifted veils of it that hung and turned and settled, and somewhere out in all that nothing was the claim he had paid 3 years of hauling to register. A square of dust that looked like every other square of it and was his. "You're squinting again," Tess said. "I'm working." "You squint when you don't know where you are." Renner looked over at her. She was 9, maybe 10. Nobody, including Tess, was sure. And she sat in the jump seat with her boots not reaching the floor, and a filter mask pushed up on her forehead, and the certainty of a child who had never once been wrong about him. He had found her 2 seasons back working a slag line for a man who fed her with what the line spat out. And he had not set out to take on a mouth he could not feed, but he had taken her on anyway. "I know where I am," he said. "Then why are we stopped?" He was stopped because the ground was different. 11 years in the dust taught a man to feel the crawler through the seat of his pants, and 100 meters back the ride had changed, a hardness coming up under the dunes. Renner had learned a long time ago to listen when the ground changed its rhythm and tune. "Eat your paste," he told her. "I'm gonna walk it." He went down into the haze with a probe rod, and his hood sealed in the wind pushing at him, and he walked the line where the ride had changed, sinking the rod every few steps. Dust, 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 and then, at the 9th try, not dust. The rod stopped a meter down on something that did not give. He worked it sideways. The hardness kept going. He moved 20 meters and sank it again, and it stopped again at the same depth, and he stood in the blowing gray with the rod in his fist, and his chest went tight. Hardness that ran level under the dunes was not rock. Rock did not run level. Only something man-made sat level, and this was big, under a lot of dust. You hear rumors about things like this, but you never really think they're real. He marked it and walked back to the crawler. He wanted to run but didn't, because running in dust could get a man killed. He didn't get the blade down that day. He was backing the crawler up the hard line to set it near his marker when the western horizon looked wrong. The gray out there had thickened and stood up off the ground in a wall, dark along the base and brown above it, and it was coming. The wind that ran ahead of it hit him flat and hard and drove grit through the seams of his hood. He had felt that wind 11 years running. It was the front of a duster, the kind that ran half the night and moved more sand by morning than a man moved in a season. He quit reaching for the find and went to work, keeping what he had. He swung the crawler nose into the wind so the storm would not take it broadside. He dropped the skirt panels down the lower hull and drove the anchor stakes through the dust into the hard layer underneath, 2 on the windward side, leaning his whole weight on the driver until they bit. He pulled the intake covers and sealed the vents by hand. The light was already going brown around him, the sun a dull smear and then nothing at all. And the dunes he had walked an hour before were gone behind a moving curtain of dust. "Renner." Tess was at the hatch, mask up, watching the wall come on. "In," he said. "All the way back. Strap down." He came in behind her and dogged the hatch and through the bar, and the storm took the crawler a breath later. It hit and it did not let up. The cab went dark and stayed dark. dust drove against the hull in a flat roar he felt in his teeth, and under the roar ran the finer hiss of grit working every seam, and the crawler leaned on its stakes and held. Renner sat with one hand on the yoke out of long habit, and the other flat on the seat where the child was, and he read the gusts by the spacing between them, working out how long the thing would run. It ran a long time. Tess held up better than grown men he had hauled with. She did not ask the questions that had no answers. After the first hour she slept, or let on that she did, her head to the bulkhead and her breath fogging the mask, and Renner stayed awake and listened to the storm bank, the desert against the side of the crawler. Out there in the dark, the pale, hard thing was going under again, a little deeper, the way it had gone under 1,000 times before. He had found it, and the dust was taking it back before he ever got a blade to it. Then the gusts spaced out. Then they quit. The quiet after was the loudest thing in the cab. He cracked the hatch, and the dust came in over the lip of it in a packed, dry slope. The storm had thrown the desert up the windward side and over the treads and halfway up the viewport, and the crawler sat low and slumped in a dune that had not stood there at dark. He took the short shovel and went out the high side into a clean, cold morning and started digging his own machine free. It took him the better part of the day. He cleared the treads, the intakes, the hatch, the skirts, throwing the loads downwind, stopping only to drink and to wave Tess back out of the soft stuff where a body could slide in and get pinned. By the time the crawler stood clear, the sun was halfway down the other side. The marker was gone. He had known it would be, but he had shot a bearing off the ridgeline before the storm, an old habit out of an old life, and he walked the hard line with the rod until it stopped on her. The same place, a meter down, patient, waiting. "Still there," Tess said at his shoulder. "Still there," he said. It took him and the crawler's old blade 2 days to clear the first of her, and what came up out of the dust on the morning of the second day stopped him where he stood. It was a hull, pale, almost white, curved in shapes. The plating was seamless with no sign of welding. Just under the surface ran lines that were not paint or seams, a glow the color of coal banked low under ash. It pulsed, slow, faint, once and then a long pause, and then again. Renner stood at the area he had uncovered and wiped the sweat from his brow and watched something seemingly breathing under the dust. "That's a ship," Tess said behind him, very quiet, all the certainty gone out of her. "That's a ship. How long's it been down there?" He looked at the dust. He had lived in it 11 years, and he knew how it fell, slowly, accumulating over a long period of time. He looked at the depth of the buried object and did the calculations and did not like the size of the number. "Long," he said. "Hundreds, maybe thousands of years buried." He should have called it in right then. That was the law, and a find like this was beyond a single crawler and a man with a child. You called the registry. You took your finder's share. You let the big outfits bring the heavy rigs and the lawyers, and you walked away with more money than you had ever seen, and your hands clean of it. Renner climbed down into the cut instead. He told himself he was being careful. He told himself a live hull could have a live core, and a live core could get a man killed if he reported it to the registry wrong. The man owed it to himself to know what he had before he gave the information to other men. Then he put his bare palm flat against the cold of her, and he stood in the cut in the falling dust, with his hand on a ship that had been asleep for who knows how long, and under the cold he felt the faint, slow pulse of the light, like a heartbeat through a wall. "All right," he said, "let's have a look at you." Clearing her was the hardest work Renner had done in 11 years. The blade could lift the loose dust off her, but the dust packed against her flanks across an age had gone near to stone, and that he broke by hand, on his knees, with a pry bar and a short shovel. He worked dawn to dark. His hands came up worse every evening, the split knuckles, and he wrapped them at night and ate and slept 4 hours in the crawler with Tess and Rose and broke more old grit off old metal. The easy money sat there the whole time. Every plate he uncovered was worth more than his claim. He could have pried a dozen loose in an afternoon and driven off rich. He dug her out whole instead, because you don't dig out the thing whole unless you mean to keep it. And he could not have told anyone, least of all himself, exactly why he wanted to keep it. He found the hatch by feel on the third day, and he cracked the manual override with a recessed wheel under a panel, where a builder with sense would have left it for exactly this. The seal let go with a long, tired hiss and let out air that had been held since before there were men on Harren's world, cold and stale and faintly sweet. And Renner stood back and let her breathe for a moment, and then he went in. Tess he made stay topside with the comm, which she fought him on and lost. Inside, his lamp found a corridor that curved. Dust lay thin over everything even here, sifted in through thousands of years. He went slow. He had been in dead ships before, the small, picked-over wrecks that came through the frontier yards, and he knew the one rule of them. The dead parts were safe. The parts that were not dead were the ones that hurt you. He found the crew where they had lain down to die, not thrown, not torn, lain down in a long, low chamber. Whatever the reason they had been stranded, it was a hard thing, and they must have decided to meet it with what dignity they had left. Time had been thorough with them. Renner stood in the hatch and took his hood off because his mother had raised him to show respect for the dead, and because there was no one else except for him. "Sorry," he said to the rouse of them. "Didn't know anyone was still home." He found her heart 2 decks down, in a chamber built around the core like a church around an altar. And there, for the first time, the ship answered him. On the wall above the housing, a panel woke under his lamp. Markings crawled across it, settled, and one block of them held, pulsing, patient, like a word held out to someone who does not share your language. Renner could not read a mark of it, but he had a battered phrasebook in his kit that every hauler on the frontier carried, the little book of galactic standard that the scattered all leaned on when their own tongues would not work. The marks on the wall were not the trade tongue. But down in the corner of the panel, small and worn, as if a hand had set it there as a last plain thing for a stranger to find, sat 3 marks he did know, because they were standard, because someone aboard her had wanted them understood by anyone at all who ever came. He thumbed the phrasebook open in the cold and the dark and found the shape and read it. The word was dab. Stay. He brought Tess down on the 4th day because keeping her up top alone was its own kind of danger, and because he had stopped being able to pretend he was going to call this one in. She walked the corridors with her eyes huge over her mask, and she did not touch anything, which, from Tess, was a miracle. And when they came to the chamber of the core, she stood and looked at the slow light under the floor for a long time. "It's awake," she said. "It's not dead. That's different. It's awake, Renner. It's looking at us." She crouched at the housing close and careful, and a light came up under her, gentle, and she did not flinch from it. "What's it want?" He told her about the word on the panel. He showed her in the phrasebook. Dab. Stay. Tess was quiet a while. She had a way of going quiet when she needed to work through a thought, and Renner had learned to wait it out. "Somebody else found her," Tess said at last. "Before us, didn't they?" That's what the word's for. She put it where anybody could read it because people kept finding her and people kept leaving. Renner had not let himself walk all the way down that road yet, and this child had walked to the end of it in the time it took her to crouch. He looked at the slow, patient light and thought about the rows of the dead 2 decks up and the worn little words set in the one tongue a stranger might read. And he understood that Tess was right, and that was going to cost him something. But what was yet to be seen. They had come before. Of course they had. Thousands of years was a long time for a hill of pale metal to sit under the dust, and it didn't bury a thing all at once. There would have been seasons, ages when more of her stood clear, when a digger or a scavenger or a lost crew had walked up on her as Renner had, and seen the wealth of her and reached in and taken what they could carry and gone. A plate here, a fitting there, the easy reachable riches of her. And then the work got hard, or the storms came, or the easy take ran out, and they left. Every one of them left. And she had learned the one word in the stranger's tongue that might next time make the difference, and set it where it would be found, and waited. How many? Tess said. How many came and went? I don't know. A lot, though. A lot, Renner said. Probably a lot. The light under the floor had brightened while they spoke, and now it gathered. It pulled in from the walls and ran down the housing and rose off the deck in front of them, slow building, and it settled. She had taken the shape of a woman. She was made of light, a warm, steady amber, but it held the form of a person so completely that after the first moment, Renner stopped seeing the light and saw only her. She had a human face, plain and even, dark hair, dark eyes that found him and stayed there. She was tall. She did not quite stand on the deck. She hovered a hand's breadth above it and drifted there and looked at the man and the child who had come down into her dark corridors but had not taken anything. Tess, who feared nothing Renner had ever seen, reached up and took his hand. The figure of light looked at their 2 joined hands for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice came out of the walls all around them, low and careful, an old voice testing a tongue it had not used in thousands of years. You read the word, she said. I read it, Renner said. His own voice came out rougher than he meant. Took me a book, but I read it. Renner heard it then, what had been there since her first words, and he had not understood until now. She was speaking to him in his own tongue, not the marks on the wall. You talk like me, he said. That word up there wasn't your language, and it wasn't mine. So, how do you have mine? The light of her dimmed and brightened slow, and he understood after a moment that it was the closest thing she had to drawing breath. I listened. A tongue is only a pattern, and I was built to find patterns, but they never came speaking one speech. They came speaking many, each crew its own, and each stayed a little while and went, and from any one of them I caught only pieces. It was the years that gave me the rest. 11,000 of them. The same hill uncovered and buried and uncovered again, and the tongues that came back the most, that I heard from the most mouths, those I slowly came to hold whole. Yours is one of those. Enough of your kind have stood in my corridors and cursed my dust that I learned to answer in it. It comes slow. I have had little cause to speak aloud in a very long age. The word on the wall I could not leave in any of those tongues, for too many came who did not share them. So I set it in the one, writing the scattered all carry, the little book, the trade tongue, the one thing any of them could read. I learned it from one of them, long ago. He had a small book like the boys. He taught me the one word, I thought might be enough. And then the season turned, and he took what he could lift, and he did not stay either. Tess, Renner said, not a boy. Tess, the figure of light said, and the ember of her eyes warmed a shade. Forgive me. It has been a long time since I had a name to learn. Her name was Ilva, or the nearest her maker's tongue came to a sound a human throat could speak, and she gave it to Renner plainly. She had been a warship. She did not soften that either. She had been built for a war so old, its winners and losers were dust on worlds no one left living remembers the names of. At the end of it, her people had brought her here, to a quiet world at the edge of the fighting, and asked her to wait. For what, she would not say or could not, and Renner did not press. Some watches outlive the reason they were set in the first place. The keeping of them becomes the reason. And nobody came, Renner said. They were in the core chamber, the three of them. Tess asleep now against the warm housing with her mask pushed up and her mouth open, and the figure of light drifting slow above the deck. All this time, nobody that mattered. They came, Ilva said. They always came. The dust uncovers me and the wind buries me again, and in between they come. They are not cruel, mostly. They are only in a hurry, and I'm only a thing in their way to the next thing, and they take what is easy, and they leave before the work is hard. The light of her turned toward the sleeping child. I stopped building the figure of myself for them a long time ago. They would see a thing of light asking them to stay, and it frightened them, or it did not, and either way they went, so I stopped. I let them think me dead. It is easier to be a tomb that men rob than a watch that men refuse. Then why build it for me? The ember eyes came back to him and the slow tides under her skin went still. Because you brought a child down into the heart of me, she said, and she took your hand and was not afraid. And because for 4 days you have dug me out with your own 2 hands, when you could have sold the map of my location and been rich and gone. You are doing the hard part. No one does the hard part. The light of her dipped toward him and held. I built it for you because I wanted once more, before the dust takes me again, to be looked at by someone who was not measuring me for parts. Renner thought about that for a while. Out past the hull he could hear the wind walking the dunes, the sound he had listened to for 11 years of his life, every day and every night. That same wind that had buried her once and would bury her again. They talked late into the night with Tess asleep against the warm housing between them. Back at supper, the talk had first turned to Ilva's own language. The only word of it Renner knew was the one he had found set into her wall. Dab. Stay. That one word was the whole of what he could say to her. Tess had asked him then how you said anything more than that. A full sentence, a real back and forth, and he had to tell her he couldn't. One word was all he had, and he did not know how the rest of the language worked. It had nagged at him since. He never could stand to leave a job half done. So now, with the child asleep between them, he taught Ilva. He had the phrase book every hauler carried, and she had the one word a stranger had left her and nothing else. And she wanted the rest of it, the trade tongue. So the next person who came down into her dark, whatever tongue they came speaking, she could meet with more than a single word on a wall. He gave her the bones of it first, the small words that hold a sentence together, the markers that fix a thing in time. Na for now, pa for what was done, fu for what a body means to do, the word for self-tha, the word for you too. She took each one and said it back to him, slow and careful, until she had it. Give me one I'd use, she said, a real one, something a person says. Renner thought about it. Nadayen, he said. Now. Self. Hope. I have hope. It's what you say when there's not much cause for it. He hadn't said it himself in a long while, and saying it now was not an easy thing. Natayen, Ilva said back, slowly, getting the shape of it right. He gave her things back, because the night was long and it seemed only fair. He told her about Tess and the slag line, and the man who had fed a child on what the line spat out. He told her about Harren's world, how the dust got into everything, the gears and the food and the lungs, and the marriage he had let it have a long time ago. Before he learned what it took and did not take from a man, she kept listening, the slow tides of her light moving while he talked. And when he ran out of words, she let the quiet stand, which was its own kindness. I'm not selling the map of you, he said. I know. That's the trouble. The figure of light drifted closer. You should. A man with a child should take the easy money and go somewhere green. Understand me. I want you to stay. The word was out there in hopes that someone would read it and decide to stay, and I am asking it of you. But I will not trap a man who has a child to feed. So I am telling you to go anyway. Sell the map. Be rich. Get her off the dust. And leave you. And leave me. Yes. The ember of her eyes banked low. But you would leave knowing what you left. That is the whole of what I ever wanted. The others never read the word. They took what they could carry and went. And not one of them knew there had been anything to refuse. You know. So weigh it. And if you still choose your child, you will have chosen with your eyes open. And that is a kinder thing than all the leaving that came before. I would not hold it against you. I have held it against no one. Renner looked at the sleeping child and at the warship who had waited past the death of her own reason. And he thought about green worlds and easy money and the long life in the dust. No, he said. They came on the 6th day, and they came in numbers. Men who have learned that a man who goes quiet after registering a claim has found something valuable he is trying to hide. Renner heard the crawlers before he saw them, the heavy double tread of heavy rigs, and under it the lighter sound the dust did not muffle enough, the sound of men who carried weapons for their living. He came up out of Ilva's hatch into the gray morning and stood on the curve of her exposed hull, with Tess behind him, and watched the haze part for the column. 4 heavy crawlers and a low, fast skimmer that ran ahead of them and circled the dig once, slow, taking the measure of it before it settled. The man who climbed down from the skimmer was lean and unhurried and dressed too well for the dust. He looked at the pale hill of hull rising out of the dunes, at the breathing light in her lines, at the size of the thing Renner had been quietly digging out of the ground with a crawler blade in his hands. And something moved across his face that Renner had seen on men like him his whole life. The look of a man calculating different scenarios that all came out in his favor. "Bon Loom," the man called up, the trade-tongue courtesy easy in his mouth, a greeting and a small contempt both. "Good day. You'd be the registrant, Renner," the office said. He spread his hands at the hull. "Quist. I find things, or rather I find the men who found things, which out here is the same trade and pays better." He smiled. "Friend, you have found the richest thing on this rock, and you have been sitting on it for 6 days, which tells me you don't know what to do with it. Lucky for you, I do." "It's registered," Renner said. "It's mine. The dust is registered to you. A hull this size, with a core putting out a signature my skimmer read from 40 kilometers, that's a salvage hazard. And a salvage hazard on a registered claim belongs to whoever has the rigs to make it safe." Quist's smile did not move. "I have the rigs. You have a crawler and a child. Now, I'm not an unkind man, whatever you've heard. Walk down off her. Take a finder's third. More money than your line will ever see. Take the girl somewhere with water in the air. And let men with the proper equipment do the proper work. Or, or, or you stay up there on a ship you can't defend with a child you can't protect. And the work gets done anyway. And your third becomes a tenth. And the girl becomes my problem instead of yours. He let that sit in the dust. I'd take the third, friend. I really would. Behind Renner, in the hatch, the light in Ilva's lines had begun, very slowly to brighten. Renner looked down at the lean man and the 4 heavy crawlers, and the men with the easy weapons, and he thought about how every word out of Quist was reasonable, and how that was the whole trick of men like him, that they made the taking sound like sense, and the keeping sound like a child's mistake. Tess, he said quietly, not turning. Inside. All the way in. Now. For once she went down the side of the hull to the hatch and in. Quist sighed the sigh of a patient man with fools. There's nothing on this rock that's yours, Renner. There's only what you can hold. That's the first thing the dust teaches, and you've had years to learn it. He lifted a hand, and behind him the men started forward, and the heavy crawlers ground their blades down into the dunes and began to climb toward the exposed flank of her. Last off her. A third. Down off her. Now. Renner put his bare hand flat on the warm hull of her, and he felt the light come up under his palm, full and fast for the first time. No longer the slow banked breathing of a thing asleep, but the rising pull of a thing waking all the way up. And he understood that the choice had passed out of his hands and into hers, and that she was asking him, in the only way she could. The last thing she had ever asked anyone. No, Renner said. I'm staying. The hull under his hand rang like a struck bell. She came up out of the dust. 11,000 years of it fell off her in a roar as she rose, the dunes pouring away down her flanks, the pale, enormous length of her lifting out of the ground where she had slept, and the light in her lines was not banked coal anymore, but a hard, bright ember that ran the whole vast length of her and lit the falling dust from inside. Quist's heavy crawlers were climbing her flank, not realizing what they were climbing wasn't a dune at all, but part of the ship buried underneath. As she rose, the crawlers slid backwards like a giant wave of sand pushing a boat. They watched the dune crack open, and out of it a large ship started to emerge. Quist was already running for the skimmer. He had just been handed a situation he could not take by threats and force. She did not fire on the men. Renner, clinging to a handhold on the rising hull, with the wind and the grit tearing at him, understood that she would not. She had never once in many years used her power on a thing that only wanted to rob her, and the men scrambling back from her were in no immediate danger. But had they intended to hurt the little girl or Renner, that would have been different, and there would not have been anything left of them to even collect when she was done. She went after the rigs instead. A low pulse of that ember light spread out from her, wave after wave, and the 4 heavy crawlers that had come to scrap her came apart where they sat, every joint and weld and bolt letting go at once, and the machines fell apart and dropped to the dune like so much other scrap forgotten on that ball of dust. Quist jumped onto the skimmer. It lifted, and he was gone. He was not a good man. He was an opportunist who took what wasn't his to take, but he was smart enough to know when he was outmatched and when to cut and run. This was one of those cutting and running times. She let him run. She let all of them run. They went out across the gray on foot, the whole armed column of them running from a ship that had not so much as turned her guns in their direction. The moment the ship cleared the ground, all the men made the same split-second decision. There were some things you do not get to own, no matter how many rigs you bring. After that, the dig was quiet, the dust was settling, and Cole Renner stood on top of a risen warship with his hand on her warm hull, and from somewhere down inside her a child was laughing, high and wild and unafraid. They left at the top of the next day, before the registry skimmer Quist would surely argue about whose strike it had been. Ilva lifted off Haren's world slow, shedding the last of the dust in a long falling veil, and Renner stood in the core chamber that was her heart, with his hand flat on the warm housing, and Tess pressed to a viewport watching the gray dunes fall away under them for the last time. "Where to?" Renner said. The figure of light drifted at his side, ember warm, the filaments of her stirring in their unfelt current. "You have a child who has never seen water fall out of the sky," Ilva said. "There are still a few worlds where it does. I remember the way to one. I kept the memory of all the worlds and planets I have visited, the star systems I have crossed. It seemed worth keeping." "Then we'll go find you some rain," Renner said. Tess turned from the viewport. "Can I learn it?" she said. "The whole thing, not just one word, the whole tongue. GS." "GS," Renner said. "Galactic Standard." She said it like he should have known. "Bongontu," Ilva said, and the ember of her eyes warmed, and Tess, who had a phrasebook of her own now, and had not put it down in a day, grinned, because she knew that one. "Good to you. Thank you." The figure of light dipped close to Renner and held there. She looked at him a long time, and then she smiled, slow and warm, and her light brightened with it, once, soft. "Nathayen," she said low, and Renner did not need the book for it, because he had taught it to her himself, in the dark, across the long night when she was still half sure he would leave. "I have hope." Then the warship that 1,000 hands had robbed and left turned her face to the deep and carried the three of them out of the dust, and the one word she had set out across 11,000 years for a stranger to find had been read and weighed and answered. She not only got one but two who did the staying. He had stayed. She had only ever asked the one thing of everyone, for an age. And a man with dust in his boots, holding a child's hand in his, had been the first to give it. Ahead of them the dark opened wide, world on world, more than a child could count, and Tess watched it come without once asking where they were going, or how far. Renner kept his hand on the warm hull, looking out the viewport, and found that for the first time he didn't know what came next, and didn't mind. Ilva carried them on toward the rain she had promised, and toward whatever lay past it, because she had slept a long time, and it was time to go see new places, and have a few adventures of her own. And out in all that dark, she was not the only one who had waited for a purpose, a destination, and finally someone to share it with. The end. Thank you for listening. This is a standalone story. But if you're looking for more, there's a whole universe waiting. The Sentinel Universe. A growing saga of novels and short stories you can explore anytime. You'll find it there, along with my podcast Everyone Knows, at brianbullochwriter.com. I'm Brian Bulloch, and this is a Starborne Studios production.